Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar called Closing the Door on Separation Anxiety with Spot On Dog Training. Tonight, we are so excited to have Toni Woods with us. She is an animal behavior certified dog trainer, a CGC evaluator, a certified separation anxiety trainer, and the proud owner of Spot On Dog Training. And very importantly, she has been a going on 13-year long partner with Lucky Dog Animal Rescue and a good friend of mine. Thank you so much, Toni, for joining us tonight and doing this webinar with us. And we're so excited to get started.
Yay. Thank you for that intro, Allie. Let's see if I can live up to all that, man.
I'm sure you will.
That sounds like a lot. I'm really happy to be here, and Lucky Dog is one of my passions, so I'm happy to be able to help.
Wonderful. And I know you've got your slideshow all ready to go.
I do.
You're going to be tuning in live on Facebook with us. And at the end, everyone, we'll also have a question and answer session. So make sure you save those questions and we'll be able to get to them at the end. But Toni, go ahead, take it away. We're excited.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Closing the Door on Separation Anxiety. As Allie just said, all those letters after my name, how awesome is that? I am a certified separation anxiety trainer, and I've been doing it for I've been training dogs since 2005, and I've been a certified separation anxiety trainer for about 5 or 6 years now. So I really love it. It's amazing work. And it, now in particular, after the pandemic or during the pandemic, I found that a lot of dogs are needing help when it comes to alone time issues. So I just want to go over what it means to have a dog that has separation anxiety or alone time issues, what you're looking for, how you can determine these things, and then, kind of give you a guide on where to go next. Now, like many of you, I can't focus when I see my face on the screen. So I am going to cut off here and then just go through the webinar with everyone. So let's go ahead and get started. There I am with my dog, Christmas Gremlin, also known as CG. I had rescued her about a year ago, and now she's got fur again and all kind of fun stuff. And she's awesome. She did not have separation anxiety, but I have had several dogs with separation anxiety. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. If you have a dog that suffers with alone time issues, let me be the first to say I'm so sorry, because I understand what that feels like. I understand what it feels like to have guilt behind, leaving your dog at home by themselves, or the stress of thinking that your dog's going to be destructive either to themselves or to some sort of your house, the door, the bed, all kinds of things that dogs can destroy if they're suffering from alone time issues. You feel heartache because you feel like this dog needs you, but you also feel like a prisoner inside your own house. So I understand what that feels like. And trust me, there is hope. Help is on the way. Hopefully this webinar will be able to help you. I've had 3 dogs in the last 15 years with separation anxiety. Some pretty intense situations there, but I have made it through. We have made it through, and the dogs have all been rehabilitated and recovered. So just know that there is definitely hope at the end of the tunnel. So a little bit about the difference between separation anxiety versus isolation distress. We use separation anxiety kind of as an umbrella term, right? As dog trainers, and then just most folks. When we talk about separation anxiety, we're normally referring to a dog that does not like to be home alone and has some type of response to being home alone. Separation anxiety is very specific to 1 or 2 individuals, right? So your dog wants to be with that one person and that one person only. They don't care who else is around. Isolation distress, which is what most dogs have, is a more general term for alone issues, right? So if your dog has isolation distress, then they don't care who's home, if your partner's home or if you take them to daycare or whatever. As long as they're not alone, they are okay. That is the difference between the separation anxiety versus isolation distress. But just know that when I'm talking about this, that I'm just going to probably use an umbrella term like separation anxiety or alone time issues, because basically that's what it is. When your dog does not want to be left alone. Okay. Now, people ask why, how did my dog get separation anxiety? Did I do it? Is it because I loved my dog too much and let my dog sleep in the bed? And no, that is not the case at all. You did not create a dog that has separation anxiety. There are reasons that it happens. Sometimes things like multiple rehoming episodes can affect your dog. Air shipping, particularly a puppy, right? If they have to be put in a kennel and then air shipped and they're solo for a long time, that can definitely have an effect. Singleton puppies, some sort of traumatic event, or a genetic predisposition, though I want to be clear that it's not breed specific, and it can develop in many different types of dogs. I've had a chocolate lab with separation anxiety, but I've also had the smaller dogs with separation anxiety, like a Maltese or Bichon. And so just because you have those breeds, don't assume that, they are genetically predisposed to having alone time issues. That is not the case, okay? But those are some of the reasons why dogs can develop, not all, but some of the reasons why dogs can start developing alone time issues. Now, separation anxiety / isolation distress, what does that mean? That means your dog is basically having a panic attack. And, some folks think, oh, my dog's just behaving poorly because I'm leaving and they have FOMO. If your dog truly suffers from separation anxiety or isolation distress, then they are having a panic attack. It is not behavioral just for the sake of being behavioral. It is a physiological change. There's psychogenic effects that are happening. There's cortisol levels increasing in the saliva. There is adrenaline pumping into the system. It's what we call the conditioned emotional response, right? So your dog is having an emotional response to the fear of you leaving or them being left alone. The best way I try to describe it to my clients is, I'm afraid of spiders. I'm an avid camper, outdoors woman, and I love being outside. Spiders live out there a lot of times, and it has taken me years and years to gradually desensitize myself to spiders and being around spiders. But when I see a spider, I immediately have an emotional response to that spider, and then I recognize, nope, that spider is not gonna hurt me. I'm gonna be okay. And after many years of gradually desensitizing myself, I've been able to hang out and go camping and see a spider and be fine. If someone put me in a room with a million spiders and said, okay, now you need to break your fear of spiders, that would never happen. And essentially that's what you're doing to your dog. You're saying, I want you to be left alone, even though that's your biggest fear, and get over it, right? So we don't want to flood our dogs with that. We want to gradually desensitize them to being left alone, just, so that they're not panicked. Because remember, just like us, dogs do not learn when they're fearful. So if your dog is afraid of something, the learning process shuts down, just like you. I can't, pick up a book and read comfortably if I know that there are several spiders walking around me. So think about it in those terms of some type of fear that you have. That's kind of the conditioned emotional response that your dog is having. Now, the training protocol that I use for separation anxiety or alone time issues is the systematic desensitization process. I would use the same thing for dogs who have noise phobia, that kind of deal, where I gradually introduce whatever triggers, make the dog upset or start to feel anxiety. And I introduce those on such low levels that I never send my dog over threshold. Now, what does threshold mean? Threshold is the place where your dog can no longer tolerate the fact that you're gone, and they actually have a physical psychogenic response to you leaving. What we do is keep the dog under threshold the entire time. So what does that mean? That means that instead of your dog immediately seeing you leave and panic and start to salivate or to scratch at the door or to howl or to whine, some of the things that you see with dogs that are having alone time issues. Instead of doing that before they get to that point, we make sure that they're no longer alone. So it's a gradual progression into being alone. And the way we do that is we slowly introduce those triggers, or as we like to call them, PDQs, which are pre-departure cues, to our dogs in scenarios where they then won't be left alone. So let me give you an example. With a client, I may see on my initial assessment that, within 20 seconds of them leaving, the dog starts to lip flick, their tail goes between their legs, they start to salivate and scratch at the door. Well, I won't I will make sure that the client comes back in way before 20 seconds, so that maybe in the first 2 or 3 seconds, the dog is feeling feeling pretty okay, and mom or dad is gone, but the dog is not going over threshold yet. And before that dog goes over threshold, I bring the parents back. So I also, in addition to that, try doing things like redirecting or kind of scrambling of the triggers. So if I normally get up and I make a pot of coffee, and then I pour my cup of coffee, and then I leave, my dog knows, oh, when she pours the coffee, that is a trigger. That's a pre-departure cue. I know she's about to leave. Or, the dog will say, my dad is about to go to work. And I know that because he's putting on those shoes, those work shoes, and not the tennis shoes that I know he puts on when I'm ready to go for a walk. So your dog knows, trust me, when you're going to leave, and all of these triggers. It's your job to figure out what your triggers are, so that you can use those to gradually desensitize your dog to those triggers, and so they don't associate them with you leaving anymore. Hopefully that's not too much information. And then you toggle up and down, with those lengths of departures, those triggers, those PDQs, and make it easier and harder until your dog gets used to you picking up your coffee mug, you having a sip of your coffee, and then you sitting on their couch and reading a magazine instead of grabbing your coffee and walking out of the door. And then eventually, gradually, you will be able to pick up that coffee cup and walk out of the door, and your dog won't care. See ya. Have a great day at work, mom or dad. I can tell you that the use of technology has become so important in separation anxiety training, because it makes for a much more organic experience. I've been training dogs since a long time now. And when I first started training dogs years and years ago, I've had some separation anxiety clients, and I had some success, but not always success, because it was not very organic. I'm coming to someone's house with a pocket full of cheese or hot dogs and trying to figure out what their dog does while they're gone. It's not always the easiest thing to do. However, modern technology has made it so we've got Furbo, and we've got Zoom, and we've got WebEx, and we've got all these things that we can watch our dog when we leave. And so we can watch their body language. I like to say I speak dog. We can read and watch their body language so that we can then figure out what their triggers are, and then use those gradually again to desensitize them to being left alone and being fearful of being left alone. When I do my separation anxiety clients, I do a weekly virtual reassessment where I look at the dog as they leave. And we also do daily missions where I write every single day a different training mission or protocol that will allow the dog to be more exposed to some triggers and PDQs, but not go over threshold. That is the whole objective, to not make your dog panic, because essentially, if your dog is able to rehearse those behaviors, then they're going to reinforce them. So think about that. You don't ever want your dog to get to a point where they're crying or whining or salivating, or all the things that are associated with alone time anxiety. So the next thing you do, me and my clients, and hopefully you, after looking at this webinar, is you make a contract with your dog. If you continuously let your dog, you leave your dog and your dog experiences anxiety, every time you leave, it gets worse, right? It's not something that just gets better over time. So if you've been, if your dog has been suffering from anxiety for years and years, or just recently because of the pandemic, please note that it does not just go away. You have to gradually desensitize your dog to being alone again, right? Even if your dog used to you going to work and working several hours, now you can barely go to the grocery store. So you have to meet your dog where they are now. And part of that is to create the contract with them that says you will not leave your dog unattended when they're not ready for it yet, until they can handle the stress. Now, does that mean you have to be a prisoner in your own home? No. That means that you have to be creative. You have to find other ways to not leave your dog alone. That can be daycare, pet sitters, family. I've had a client in the past that contacted a university and looked for a student who loved dogs but couldn't bring dogs to college, and offered them lunch every day and an internet option so that they could come and hang out with their dog and study. So that was one way to, a very inexpensive way to get someone to take care of their dog, and prevent their dog from being alone. Now, over the last couple of years, this hasn't been as much of an issue because of the pandemic, but I know that people are starting to get back out, and you're noticing that, if you try to leave and go to the grocery store, maybe your dog is acting a little differently than, they did in 2019. So just be aware that just because you're telling your dog you're not leaving does not mean you are bound to the house and that you're a prisoner in your own house. I want you to think about your dog as an individual, which he or she is, right? It is the study of one, and your dog is going to respond to things differently than another dog, just like humans do. So if I'm learning to play the violin and I practice 5 hours a day, and you're learning to play the violin and you practice 5 hours a day, we're still going to learn differently because we are different humans. We learn differently, we process things differently. And so think about your dog in those terms, right? It's going to be specific to your pup. And I also don't want you to think about the severity level of the anxiety, in terms of timeline, because it is not directly related. What I mean by that is I've had a dog where that was very, very, very anxious and jumped through a window to get to their parent, which was very upsetting and it's terrifying. The dog did not hurt themselves, luckily, but that's what we would consider pretty intense, right? As far as anxiety issues. Self-mutilation, chewing on the paws and tails, that kind of deal. That is what most people think of as severe anxiety. It took about 3 months for that dog to start sleeping comfortably for about an hour and a half, right? We were so excited about that. And so 3 months is, in the big scheme of things, is not a very long time when that person had been dealing with anxiety for years. However, I had another dog that was barely whining. You could tell that there was some anxiety from the body language. There was a little bit of salivation, that kind of deal. But, most people would see that case and say, oh, my dog suffers from mild separation anxiety. However, it took me 8 months to get that dog better and calm and comfortable, because even though those symptoms were mild, the dog is still on the inside having a panic attack. And you want to make sure that you don't associate the severity with how long it might take. It took much longer for the dog who was expressing what many would say as milder symptoms to recover than it did the dog who was jumping out of the window. So I want you to make sure that it's a study of one and it's going to be specific to your dog. And typically when I'm working with a client, I take the first month to build a foundation, because I know how to speak dog, but you have to learn how to speak your dog specifically, right? So the first couple of weeks, you're going to be building information, a body of information that you can use to determine, how your dog is feeling, how your dog is progressing, etc. So what to expect when you're working with a separation anxiety trainer, or yourself. You can expect regressions and plateaus, just like humans, right? So if I am on a diet and I lose 5 pounds the first week, wonderful. But then maybe the next week I don't lose anything. I plateau. And even though I'm doing the same amount of exercise and I'm working out and I'm eating properly, and then the next week I gain 2 or 3 pounds, even though I'm still doing all of the things that I have been doing before. So just remember, regressions and plateaus are normal. Okay. I've had experiences where a dog had gotten up to 2 or 3 hours of sleeping, and then there was a vacation from the parents. And then when we came back, the dog regressed back down to about 30 minutes. And it took us 4 or 5 days to get that dog back up to 2.5 to 3 hours. However, because the guardians knew that was a possibility, they were calm, they were comfortable, and they did not exhibit that anxiety and kind of dump that onto their dog, because they knew that was a possibility. The key is to be patient, right? And to meet your dog where they are right now. If you can get out the door and your dog is crying within 3 minutes, then you are going to start your training protocol at 15, 20 seconds. Okay. So you're going to make it easier for your dog to start, and then you'll gradually make it more difficult. And again, you'll be toggling up and down with difficulty because you don't want to just keep making it more difficult, more difficult, more difficult. You want to make it more difficult, and then you need a little easier, and then maybe a little bit more difficult. Hopefully that's making sense, the whole toggling thing. All right, so now that we've talked about what separation anxiety isolation disorder is, let's talk about how you know if your dog has it or not. The language of dogs. And again, I like to say that I speak dog. They don't speak English or French or Portuguese or any of the languages that I'm aware of. However, their body says it all. Their bodies don't lie. Dogs tell you the truth with their bodies. And so as a responsible guardian, if you are trying to figure out what your dog is saying, you need to learn their body language, okay? And to be able to observe that regularly. Now, dogs have signs of arousal that they exhibit in their body, right? They use it to communicate with other dogs, with other humans. Sometimes it can be subtle, sometimes it can be very apparent, but dogs have things that, they do with their body to let us know what they're thinking. They use their eyes to look at us, to prolonged eye contact. If another dog is looking at another dog intensely and staring there, that's not a good sign. Normally that leads to an altercation. So if you're very aware and observing what your dog is doing, you can not only determine if they are suffering from anxiety, but you can prevent things from happening at the dog park, right? If you're at the dog park and you're looking at your dog and not on your phone or texting, then your dog can tell you all of these things, with their eyes, with their tails, with their mouths, if you're paying attention. So make sure you start quizzing yourself and reading some more information about dog body language and what it says and what that means. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to, we talked about the here when we talked about the eyes, but let's talk about ears as well. Ears and tails are really important for dog communication. And I say that because that is how they speak to each other, right? Their ears move a certain way, their tails move a certain way, their mouths, their muzzle move a certain way. And if you clip your dog's ears or dock their tail, you are putting your dog at a very big disadvantage because they can no longer communicate the way that they were meant to communicate. So just be aware of how important ears, tails, body language is when we're talking about figuring out what's going on in your dog's head. Panting, things like panting and yawning, those are normal things that dogs do. But if your dog starts to pant and yawn and lip flick every time you start putting on your tennis shoes or every time you start brushing your teeth, then these probably are associated with you leaving and building anxiety. So these are the kinds of things that you need to start paying attention to figure out when your dog starts experiencing anxiety. I've had clients whose dogs experience anxiety as soon as they get out of the shower because the dog knows right after the shower comes the toothpaste and then comes the blow dryer and then comes the tennis shoes and then their parent is gone and the anxiety starts. So make sure that you're keeping tabs and actually writing down what body language your dog has so that you can determine if some of these are anxiety and not, are related to you leaving and not just kind of normal doggy body language behaviors. All righty, so I'll just go back here really quickly just to make sure. For instance, a tail example, I have been working with a client who for the first 2 months, every time she left, the dog's tail would immediately go down and in between their back paws. They did not like it. They were not happy. They stayed under threshold because, again, remember, you don't want to let your dog rehearse these behaviors. But eventually, as we gradually desensitize this dog, now when the parent, their guardian leaves, the dog's tail stays neutral and it's working toward being up a little bit, a little happy, right? So looking for things like this are other ways to determine if your dog is feeling anxiety. So you're looking at the tail, you're looking at the body language, whether they're, stiff and rigid, or these are kinds of things that you're also paying attention, not for just separation anxiety, but for general loving of your dog. If you're in a dog park or anywhere where your dog is meeting another dog or another human. These are all things that you want to pay attention to. If your dog is, stiff or leaning forward, head held high, excuse me, as opposed to leaning backwards and the head low and maybe even cowering. These are things that you want to make sure you learn specifically for your dog. Again, movement, these are all types of communications with your dog. So tail, ears, mouth, body, movement, how they're moving. If dogs freeze while they're staring at you, get in there and get the dog out quickly, because that normally means a fight, right? So these are all things that you're using to determine what your dog is saying, even though they're not speaking to you and saying, hey, my pet parent, I'm going to bite this other dog or this human. This is your job to figure out what their body language means, and so that you can be proactive instead of reactive. Now, displacement behaviors. These are things that dogs do to try to displace in a certain situation. Let's see, make sure I'm saying this right. Sniffing the ground, self-grooming, licking. They're basically trying to displace something, a response to something that's happening. So if they're not feeling comfortable about something, they may start sniffing the ground. If they're not feeling happy about another dog or about you leaving, they might start doing some lip flicking or excessive yawning, which again could just be your dog's tired. But if they're doing it at particular times, that's when you want to pay the most attention to that as well. And then their calming signals. So things like relaxing and tail body language, and all of these things are ways that your dog will have calming signals to help them along with any kind of confrontational situation, right? So if your dog is trying to tell another dog, I don't want to fight you, but their ears are clipped and their tail is clipped and they are not very good at giving or reading appeasement signals, that can be an issue too. So again, learning your dog's body is very important to the whole behavior situation and well-being of your dog, right? So you can feel comfortable in knowing what your dog is thinking and feeling. Okay, and I don't want to keep reiterating. So we've got some other things there: turning away, turning head. These are all things that the dog is trying to say, hey, I agree with you. I'm appeasing you. I just want to make you happy. Please just love me. Okay, so lifting the paw, all of these things. And so make sure that you are learning these as well. So to wrap up about the separation anxiety, the key to success, I believe, is time, patience, and often appropriate medication. Now, I know that, years and years ago when I started training, a lot of folks did not like medication. They didn't want to get their dogs on medication. They were concerned about, would they be able to wean their dogs off? Well, I can tell you over the last 15 years, they've done a lot more research on dog medication than prior to that. And what they have been able to do is take the worry out of the different types of medication. So there's doggy Prozac, so things like fluoxetine and Reconcile, things that are get into your dog's system, into their tissues, and kind of time release over time, just make them feel less anxious. And then there are things that we call episodics, which are things specific to episodes. So things like trazodone or clonidine, things that you would use in a particular situation, for instance, fireworks, or you leaving, which causes your dog a panic attack in this particular situation for separation anxiety. Those are things, medications that can be helpful and very appropriate to help you get your dog rehabilitated and more comfortable with being home alone. The fear of putting your dog on medication, I think, should not outweigh the benefit of making your dog actually feel better. If they're anxious all the time because they think you're about to leave them all the time, then that's got to be horrible, right? Think about yourself. You don't want to feel anxious all the time. And so sometimes you don't need medication, but often it is appropriate for medication to be administered, particularly if you're dealing with a dog who's been suffering from alone time issues for long periods of time. So just keep those three things in mind, those three keys: time, patience, and medication work wonders toward helping to rehabilitate and heal dogs suffering from alone time issues. My mentor, Milena DiMartini Price, you should check out her book if you get a chance to. Treating separation anxiety in dogs is not quick or easy, but it can be done. And I can attest to this from having 3 dogs of my own that I've trained to feel better about being left alone, alone time issues. And because I've been working with clients for many years now, and I've seen a lot of clients come through, and it's amazing and beautiful to just have a client say, hey, I just went to have dinner with my family for 3 hours, and when I came back, my dog is sleeping. There's no better feeling for a person who loves a dog who is suffering from alone time issues. My final point here would be that separation anxiety can be treated even when previous success was dismal. So again, as I said before, when I was training years ago, we had a process that we thought worked, but it wasn't as organic as it is now. And so if in the past you haven't been successful, please don't give up, and know that it is definitely separation anxiety can be treated, and your dog can get healthy and stop suffering from anxiety. It is not something that is something that you can't imagine happening. You just have to be patient, and it'll take a little bit of time. All right. If you need to contact us, I'm sure that Allie will get some information to everyone and post all of that. But we help with separation anxiety. We also do other stuff at Spot On. But right now we want to focus on all of you who need to get out and go to the grocery store or go have dinner. Now that life is, we're getting out of our homes again, we want to make sure that we don't send our dogs into panic as you are starting to leave more often. So with that, I will turn it over to Allie.
Great. Thank you so much, Toni. And it looks like we already have some questions. And for everybody that's watching, now is a great time. If you do have questions about things that Toni was speaking to us about, please put them in the chat so that we can have a discussion. Toni, the first question was, is crate anxiety part of isolation distress?
Wonderful question. So what we have found is that a lot of dogs that suffer from alone time issues also suffer from confinement disorder, right? Mm-hmm. So in a crate can be very, very difficult for them. When I'm training for separation anxiety, we don't use crates. I do not use a crate unless it's very specific to that dog that needs a crate for whatever reason. The reason we do this is because most dogs that suffer from isolation disorder also have confinement disorder. And so because I'm watching the whole time, and you're not letting your dog, you're not leaving, right? You've made that contract with your dog. You're not going to leave your dog alone. Because of that, they can be out and about. I normally suggest one room, right? I don't normally suggest that the dog has access to the entire house, but one room where you've got your camera set up. I can see everything. You can see everything on your Furbo. And then that way you come back in before your dog starts going over threshold, before your dog can be destructive, before your dog can eliminate in the house, before your dog does any of those things that are associated with separation anxiety. And they don't have to be in the kennel for that to happen because you're watching, right? Okay. So we offer a webinar on crate training and how to turn a crate from being a prison to being a den and a happy place, because dogs want their own clean, comfortable, secure spot that they can go to. But if they've ever had any bad experience with being left in the crates too long, it can become a negative association, right? If the crate's been used for punishment, or they've been in there for hours and hours and hours every single day, then those dogs can develop an anxiety toward the confinement. But you can still work on a dog who has separation anxiety, even though they have confinement disorder.
Well, that sounds like a whole nother webinar that we need to get.
It is.
I'm sure the fosters would love that as well. The next question that we have is, what do you do if you just aren't able to be home or take your dog to daycare while you're gone and you're the only one? Can you practice on days that you are available?
You can, but honestly, the healing begins with your dog trusting that you are not going to leave them alone. So that is the crux, right? I mean, I know that daycare can be expensive. So, taking your dog to daycare every day is not feasible for a lot of folks, right? But you can be creative. I've had a couple scenarios where people really wanted um, to help their dog, but they didn't have the money, or their scenario didn't allow them to do so. So they were creative, like the university student who came to a client's house every Monday through Thursday to sit with the dog and study and have lunch, right? I've had a scenario where clients reached out to uh, um, senior citizen homes or places that they have folks there all day to see if maybe they can, do you want a mascot puppy, a mascot dog to hang out with you guys all day? Exactly. And that has happened. So being creative helps, to try to figure out someone to help take care of your dog. If you've got any neighbors or friends with dogs that have separation anxiety, trying to barter, hey, I can be home Mondays and Wednesdays, if you can be home Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we'll take turns on who's watching the dog. I believe that my colleagues, CSAT separation anxiety colleagues, we might have a list of folks in Washington, D.C. in certain areas who have experienced separation anxiety or are currently experiencing alone time issues with their dog. And so we use that as a resource so that they can contact each other to see if it's possible, to take turns watching the dog. But yes, you can practice when you can, but as soon as you leave your dog, that they're going to rehearse that behavior and reinforce it. And so the couple days that you train are not really going to make an effect overall if your dog actually has isolation disorder.
So it needs to
distress.
be daily and consistent.
Yes.
Okay. That does make sense.
Yeah.
Now, Lucky Dog's an all foster-based network, which is incredible. We have hundreds of wonderful fosters that take in our animals. And, our animals are coming from high kill shelters, so they're not always coming from the best situations, and we don't have that background about what they've been through previously. What kind of advice do you have for our fosters if they get an animal in their home that is experiencing separation anxiety? I know you had talked about kind of before the animal reached going over their threshold, you would bring mom or dad back in, but the fosters might not have that bond with the dog yet. So what do you think they could do kind of to help the animals transition or deal with it in a foster home?
Well, remember, if this dog is suffering from alone time issues, the separation anxiety specific to one individual, right? If that one person leaves, the dog panics. That is an issue with someone who has a bond with that dog. If your fosters, have just met this dog, you're not going to have to worry about that. You're not going to have to worry about the separation anxiety because there's not going to be that type of bond with the dog. You're going to have to worry about isolation distress. And in that case, the dog doesn't care that they don't have a bond. They're having a panic attack because they're being left alone, not necessarily because that specific foster is leaving them. Okay. So, you know what I mean? So it's still the same practice of, if they're finding out that this dog is suffering from alone time issues, then the protocol is to do the exact same thing that we just talked about, which is figure out a way to not leave this dog home alone. Now, I can tell you, I've had scenarios where if there's another pet in the house or another dog or another cat or that kind of deal, it seems to calm some dogs. But I've also had scenarios where a person gets another dog so that their dog can stop suffering from separation anxiety. And then both dogs have separation anxiety when they contact me, right? So just because the animal is there with another sentient being does not necessarily mean it's going to fix the problem. It's about being alone, not whether or not it's that particular foster that's leaving them. So it all still applies. They're going to have to figure out a way so that this dog doesn't necessarily have to be alone, whether that's through a network, a community of folks that'll help them, watch this dog until they can gradually train them to be left alone. And again, remember, medication is a big deal. I've had clients who told me the first 6 months, I don't want to get on medication. And then they got on medication and in 2 months, their dog was a different dog. Right. So these are all tools that we use. I used an example. If your kid was your doctor said, oh, your kid is suffering from pre-diabetes, you wouldn't say, oh, let's wait till the kid goes into diabetic shock before we try the medicine. No, you would get the medicine that you needed, the insulin that you
Right.
needed immediately for your kid. So this can, you can think about the medication for the dogs in the same kind of way. This dog needs this medication to make them feel less anxious, and if they're feeling less anxious, then that is how you get the results.
Okay. And that's
Hopefully
something.
that answers the question. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
no,
an easy fix, but it's one of those things that, you gotta figure out how to make the contract with the dog. That's the most important part.
right. And I think, we have a great program manager for vetting with Lucky Dog, and we have definitely used medication routes for some of the dogs that have issues and seen good results. My own personal dog has those issues and takes her meds every single day. And you're right, she is a different dog with and without the medication. So definitely.
And Allie, I've had clients who've needed medication for several years, and then their dog was better and they were able to wean
Right.
off if that was what they decided. I mean, that's what I did with my last lab. I don't know how many of you remember Cena, my Cena Bina, as
Mhm.
the kids in the neighborhood called her. But when I first got her, I'd take her out and we'd go pee, potty, the whole thing. And then I'd bring her back in and I put her in the kennel and she'd poop and roll in it. Right. That that was never any fun. And then I figured, okay, maybe it's confinement. So I just let her kind of hang out in the living room. Same thing happened. And we started working on a protocol. We got on medicine. And within a year, I was able to, she would sleep for hours and hours when I left, and was able to eventually wean her off the medication. So it's not like once you get your dog on the medication that you necessarily have to do that forever. But trazodone is one of those things where if you're having to use it for long periods of time or for forever, it's not harmful necessarily. I mean, all the vets that I've ever spoken to in detail about those type of episodics say that it's, as long as there's not a overload in serotonin uptake. So as long as you don't do too much, as long as you're not giving too much or too often, that it's not going to have a long-term effect.
That makes sense. Another question is, so Lucky Dog's known for doing lots of puppies, as you know, and I'm wondering if you can give some advice to our puppy fosters about what they can do with their puppies to help them not get separation anxiety, not develop separation anxiety for their future adopters.
Gotcha. Well, dogs are creatures of habit, right? So you want to have a schedule. And part of that schedule, built into that schedule, should be alone time, particularly if you're using a crate. I believe that crate training, if done properly, offers a wonderful, secure area where your dog can just say, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to go lay in my kennel. I'm going to go to sleep. If you're able to do that. So building in crate time with the most delicious Kong, or the most delicious, hopefully non-stinky bully stick, or a Himalayan, right? So you're going to actually build in time into your regular schedule where your dog gets to be alone. Not only maybe in the kennel with their favorite treat, but once you are able to get your dog into the kennel, and again, this takes time, right? It's a gradual progression. You don't just throw your dog in the kennel for 30 minutes. You put your dog, my suggestion is to feed your dog and give your dog water into the kennel,
Great.
in the kennel, because dogs are very clean and they don't want to pee and poo where they eat. So if you're feeding in your kennel, then that's all of a sudden, now this is my den. I don't want to soil my den. And gradually get your dog or your pup to eat in the kennel and drink in the kennel. Eventually you'll be able to close the door. They'll be able to be in there for 5-10 minutes. And then once you get up to 30 minutes, then the next step is to leave the room, right? And so even though your dog is there and you're home, you can now leave the room and give your dog some alone time, so that you're gradually building that alone time up. And then once you get to 30 minutes there, then you can actually start, doing things like leaving the house. And now, granted, when it's a puppy, I'm not saying stay home for weeks and weeks before you leave, but the point is that it's, they are creatures of habit. And so if you develop a potty training scenario, you're going to want to include in the potty training scenario with your training all of the things that you do with a puppy. Alone time, build in alone time, so that they are okay with being alone when you're not there. Enrichment is, I can't say enough about enrichment puzzles, things that make them think and get them mentally, physically. So they need to be not only physically tired dog is a well-behaved dog, but they need to be mentally tired. So you want to work on enrichment puzzles, training, that kind of deal. And then when they go in the kennel, they'll just want to go to sleep because you've exhausted them.
That's the best thing that a puppy foster wants, is a puppy that sleeps, especially through the night.
Sleepy puppy. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, well, Toni, thank you so much for your time and for all your knowledge and sharing it with us. This has been so valuable. And, if anybody has questions, they can certainly reach out to Lucky Dog. It's info@luckydoganimalrescue.org. We'd be happy to pass on your questions to Toni, and I'm sure she would be happy in return to answer them.
I will.
And of course, you got to check out her website, which is spotondogtrainingdc.com, for additional webinars and her personal webinar sessions that she has on there. They're amazing, and I encourage everybody to check them out. And hopefully, Toni, we can get you back again for another webinar session, maybe on crate training next time.
Lucky Dog is my soft spot. Got a very deep soft spot in my heart for Lucky Dog. I'm always here for you guys when you need me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Toni. We really appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody, for watching. And we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, Allie. Take care, everybody.